Excellent. Right, so welcome everybody. Welcome to Catch Rain farmers. Welcome to farmers that have come through Quorum Sense, Beef and Lamb, or any other networks to find this webinar. And anyone else who's not a farmer, there's a couple of scientists and stuff that we've invited to join us this evening. So great to see you there. My name's Sam Lang. I'm the project lead for Catch the Rain. I've been involved with Quorum Sense for about 5 years now, and my family and I farm in the foothills in mid-Canterbury. For anyone new to Quorum Sense, it's a community of farmers, growers, researchers, coaches, and others that are committed to the creation of thriving biological and regenerative farm systems across New Zealand. Whole bunch of activities and things that happen under the Quorum Sense umbrella, and Catch the Rain's one of the projects that's being run at the moment as part of that. And Catch the Rain itself is a 2.5-year project funded by Beef and Lamb New Zealand. We've got around 40 farmers across the country implementing on-farm trials to test various system and practice changes aimed at improving rainfall infiltration, soil moisture retention, and other soil health and pasture outcomes. And so, yeah, big thanks to Beef and Lamb in particular for supporting Catch the Rain in this webinar. So the intentions for this evening, or for the webinar for those that are watching the recording, is firstly just to introduce the concept of deferred grazing, if it's new to anyone. Also to share a range of different systems that are using deferred grazing in different ways, including how farmers decide what to defer, how to manage it, etc. We can get into the nitty-gritty. To discuss the possible benefits and risks that farmers have experienced. And finally, to have a good question and discussion session at the end to hopefully leave you more confident in your ability to implement deferred grazing going forward. Before I go any further, for those of you that might not be familiar with Zoom technology, there's the Q&A box down the bottom there that you can start throwing your questions in at any point as we're going. Don't have to save them to the end there. So if anything comes up, we might cover it a bit later on, but if not, feel free to chuck it in there and get a few questions in for when we get to that point. Any issues with technology or anything like that, feel free to pop something in the chat there, and one of the team will hopefully see it and we can sort it out as we go. So what we're going to cover this evening, pretty simple. I'm going to give a very quick overview of what deferred grazing is, and it's by no means an extensive definition. And then we've got, we're really lucky to have Mark Koopmans, Russell Heald, and Jono through, three farmers from quite different contexts, different parts of the country, quite different experiences with deferred grazing, and it's been a real intentional selection to sort of illustrate how deferred grazing can be used differently in different contexts for different reasons. All with, and yeah, there's a pretty impressive amount of experience between those three, so really stoked to have them there. And as I said, we've got the Q&A at the end, so we'll try and make sure we've got a good 25-30 minutes to get stuck into that. So what is deferred grazing? Might be a bit of a, might be obvious for those of you that are familiar with it, but we'll go through it just in case. Deferred grazing is a management tool to maintain pasture quality from mid-spring onwards, effectively by increasing your stocking rate, having dropped out some paddocks out of the round, and using that to carry surplus spring pasture into low growth periods of the year. I pitched a bit of that from the ag research definition because I've done some good work on this, and I will make sure I share the link to that later on towards the end. Paddocks are generally shut up or deferred when pasture growth exceeds animal demand, so typically that's in spring. It can also be in autumn to carry that feed into winter. It's usually grazed as what might be considered standing baleage or hay. Depending on the timing of grazing, is going to influence the quality. It generally promotes an increase in pasture diversity and deeper roots by letting those plants fully not only recover, but effectively go through a full growth cycle, again, depending on how long you leave it for. Deferred paddocks can be grazed and utilised in lots of different ways, and by lots of different stock classes or multiple stock classes. There's a lot of ways you can chop and change this one, and generally it has a pretty beneficial impact on soil and pasture quality going forward, and is sometimes used to improve poorly performing paddocks. And there's a pretty long list of reasons you might want to get into deferred grazing, but I'll let the farmers speak to that, and that can come out in the Q&A as well. So the first person I'd like to introduce this evening is Mark Koopmans. Mark and Laura farm on the inland Kaikoura Road in sort of North Canterbury at Hawk Hills Farm. We were lucky enough to have a field day there last week, and I've been looking forward to getting there for a few years. So really enjoyed that. Mark and Laura started mob grazing and introducing diverse crops and pastures in 2018 on their Hill Country sheep and beef farm, and they've also just started a sheep milking operation on their flatter country. Mark was also on our first webinar, well, probably 6 weeks ago or so, which was a high-level session on regenerative grazing management. And there were lots of people wanting to know more in sort of more detail on what Mark was up to. So great to have you back, Mark, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Sam, for that. Yeah, so Sam pretty much alluded to what we do. I farm a sheep and beef farm and sheep dairy with my wife, Laura. We're 1,600 hectares with about 1,000 hectares of native bush and 600 hectares of effective country across the board. I won't go too far into the introduction too much, but I'm going to go straight into it. So pretty much I thought I'll start off with a context and why I like deferred grazing in general. It happened back in 2020. We had a bit of an autumn drought, and we were stuck with we were stuck with no feed ahead of us. But my wife lovingly had deferred grazed her horse paddock, and so she had that paddock of deferred grazing of horse paddock. She went and grazed that with her horses for a couple of weeks with them behind the wire, actually decking it to the bulls straight down, and then she put up a back wire about 2 weeks later, and the grass started growing, and we had zero rainfall from that, and the grass ended up growing for about 2,500 kg dry matter cover, and we had that with no rain at all, and the rest of the farm was brown, and that little patch where a horse paddock was green. So that's what got us into deferred grazing and seeing what it could do for us as a larger farming scale. So it gives us that. We now use it as more of like a buffer through summer and to control when we need quality feed in terms of like for flushing for ewes and wintering ewes on for obviously when they're in lamb, and almost like trying to guarantee that sort of quality tucker when we need it if we don't actually get any rain. So that's how we're using it for. We also do a bit of lamb finishing on it if we need to as well. A few other paddocks that we've done it on are just to reseed it a wee bit, just give it a bit more depth. And they're specifically picked for that. But that's, that one you've got to pick what paddocks you want to do that with, because you don't want really a heap of weeds growing if you're picking the wrong pastures or wrong type of paddock. So I'll get into this first slide. I've got two dates here. These are the same paddock, just a year apart from each other. That's pretty much what I like to see as a pasture on our farm. One's in the autumn and one's in the summer, late spring. Obviously heaps of rain in those two pictures, no moisture deficient pastures there. But that paddock was a rundown pasture that we deferred the year prior to this. So that was virtually brown, quite open and sparse. So that's a bit of that was our first deferred paddock we ever did. And I think I sent Jono through photos of it thinking, when am I supposed to graze this paddock and not? And obviously done it very decent high density grazings. We did that at between 150,000 to 200,000 kgs of cattle. And that's your result. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Sam, do you want to flip to the next slide? So this is our bit of our hill country, bit of our with our cows in the spring, what we want our pastures to kind of be looking like. And well, we've got calves on there, they're only just calving now in that photo. This is what we would like to achieve in the spring. So just giving you a bit of context of what deferred grazing is achieving for us when we're actually not in that mode at the time. So obviously pretty lush pastures, that's obviously in the spring, but it's been giving us a lot of rest that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have deferred grazing. Yeah, Sam, do you want to flick through the next one? This is, I've got 4 slides or 4 photos of a deferred grazing paddocks and what they look like. This is done on our intensive flats, where we do a lot of our young stock finishing and carrying through. Oh, we also have our Lamar twins around here as well, set stock for 6 weeks. So this is just a pasture that we've rested. On the 29th of Jan, I took that photo, we're about to go into it. And then on the right there, you see a comparison. We have a fence line there, that's the rest of the paddock on the 29th of Jan. It was pretty slow, we had pretty minimal rain then. It was getting a bit moody that day, but didn't actually get any rain. But that's, yeah, what the rest of the farm is looking like is a bit luscious green, and then that was kind of semi-deferred paddock, I would call that. Sam, do you want to flick through? So, if someone told you you needed cattle to graze up the deferred grazing, that would be mistaken, because considering that I haven't used cattle this year to do much of the deferred grazing, to notch it off. We actually did this pretty quickly on the 1st of Feb. This was about 10 days before we actually were going to wean our ewes. I grabbed all our twin mob ewes, and that paddock's 1.5 hectares, and we just chucked the ewes through there. They're only in there for about a day and a half, I think, and you can obviously see the trampling and what they achieved there. And then 5 weeks later, on the 7th of March, that's what you get. Gives you a good idea of what sort of quality you can get back. There was only, well, I guess I got rain this year. There was 15 mils of rain that had fallen. Well, it would have probably achieved that without that. But that's, yeah, still looks a bit messy, as in with the sheep, but I would call that reasonably pretty well. And then the next grazing would sort out the rest of that tag as well. And that trampling is what's keeping the moisture in the ground, lets all the seedlings strike as well, so you don't actually need rain to do that. And that just jump starts everything. And then if you're lucky enough to get a follow-up rain, it just carries on. One thing I would mention is that density does help in getting lots of urine and shit around. That helps break down all that what do you call it, all the carbon, really helps break that all down, because if you start building a thatch layer, it's not going to work. So you've got to have good biology already in the soil to try and get that going, and that pretty much is breaking away pretty quick down on the flats as well. Yeah, so that's what we did for a flat farm, so we can shift that. So we had decent food on that. On our hill country, this site would be at the top of that hill, would be 600 meters possibly. What we've deferred, we actually, so this paddock is actually picked for we winter our ewes on it, and it's quite reasonably close by to the house. So I can actually, because we microclimate in there, I can actually drive to the bottom of it. So that's it before we about to graze it. And then the next photo is what beside it is literally what you can achieve, and that's about 50 days rest, where you see all that green. I took that photo obviously the other day, and that obviously this hill country can virtually only grows 5 or 6 ton a year. So to move pasture quality over to when you need it, for like, so we winter out in lamb ewes on here on our single ewes and lamb ewes for about 45 days, and that picks them up, and that quality feed can be shifted. And the reason why we defer graze is on this context is that we need to guarantee our winter feed. I can't just turn the irrigator on and get some water and put some crops in. And it's really low cost to do something with large scale. I've got a lot of hill country, so I can easily do this large scale. That's a 40 hectare block we can completely control. So shifting that nutrition over to the winter and be able to guarantee it without water, that's the idea behind it. Rainfall it doesn't bother me if I don't get any rain. I know we'll get the cover and the roots deep enough that it's just going to grow anyway, and get us through. And even just a wee drizzle would just keep it ticking along. So, and but that's also a very long time for rest as well. So the biology breaks down all that thatch and it actually comes out quite good. And the density is key there. You've got to get decent sized mobs to do that. And that's done with completely all sheep. So no cattle on that block. That's all done with sheep as well. Had a lot of water issues this year, so I couldn't use the cattle to do what I wanted them to do. But we used the sheep, so that worked out pretty well to do that.
Mark, so just looking at those photos, like how much of what we're seeing on the left there did those sheep trample versus how much did they eat? Because the photo on the right is looking like there's not a huge amount left standing, albeit it's up the top near the fence, so there's probably a bit more down further, I imagine.
Yeah, they probably trampled close to 50% of that. Obviously it was quite long. Yeah, and they probably ate the other 50%. Yeah, pretty high trampling rate on it, which is what gives me the moisture. Like if you look under that, all that trampling, it's actually quite moist and gets the seedling striking, and then it just needs a bit of drizzle or anything to get it going. But a lot of that's new seed, and also a lot of it's the old grasses get up and go, and they also form another wee microclimate as well. So it's all to do with water, in my opinion, with that. But the one thing I would say to be careful with is trying to do like a hill country, like that's not really brown top anymore. If you're doing it with brown top, you can't, like, you're just, other than getting density up there, you've got to be wary of what that pasture can do. This hill block's been doing that for about 4 or 5 years, and it's just getting better and better every year. There will be a limit until how far it will go, but I'm happy where it is at the moment as well. Next thing. These photos are just to show, so this block on the left of both these photos, just to show bit of where we're doing it. This is at 800 meters high. This block is 300 hectares. You don't, like, to me, this one is more for getting, cattle through summer dry or something. And as you get better at your longer rotations and rest periods on your hill country, you start getting that deep green underneath, how that pasture is. So this isn't like like I've set stocked it or lightly grazed it and then pulled the cattle off and thought, oh yeah, let's defer it. This has been shut up since probably early December, and while we still had heaps of moisture, the clovers are still thriving, and there's still a lot of active growth, and that's what builds up the base, and that's what keeps it going. Like, that's how we keep the quality a little bit up on it. And then I think we might have had 90 days before it came in here, and all that long grass, and that just keeps any bit of mist we got this year, that grass was soaking wet, and that just keeps down now green, and that's how you can we chuck some cows up here, and we don't really high density graze it. It's more of a rest, but it gave us a whole month worth of feed that we didn't even have to worry about, and we could actually had cows and calves and ewes up there doing pretty well on it. And that the amount of rest period, now they're off there now, it's actually already growing back with the rain we've got, it's just bounced back, and it's actually looking quite amazingly green up there, and you can see the growth coming straight out, where the rest of the farms that I can see around us, their grass isn't like they've had 20 or 30 odd mils and nothing's really bouncing back, where these hill blocks are really starting to crank up, well, compared to what I'm used to seeing. And do you want to go to the last slide, Sam? So if you can all do temporary fencing or have a Rolls-Royce idea, this block is 7 hectares on Class 6 country that I fenced off the native bush for. And we did this with ewes and cows. Actually, we had ewes going here first and then the cattle coming behind. So this is just, we can get the real density up here. This paddock is a north-facing side. Mind you, we're supposed to be in a drought. Don't tell the farm that because it doesn't seem to know. But that's usually my driest paddock on the farm. When in 2020 we were in drought, that was the first paddock to go brown. That one now, I was just bombshelled of what feed it had in there at the time, when we just let it deferred, and now that's bouncing back. I probably lost track of what I was talking about too. This paddock here is specifically used for flushing. So we had about another 50 hectares of deferred grazed on the steep hill country that we ran through with two-tooth ewes and cows in behind them, just to dry heifers. And that was without rain, to guarantee the feed that we need for flushing. Our ewes are going on to being flushed on the 27th of April. So this was grazed that was in February. So we need to know that we can grab quality feed to shift that without rain. This is a good example. This year was a good example, bugger all rain, but we've still got, well, they guaranteed 50 hectares of good feed. I've actually got other pastures that are starting to liven up, but they'll be hit later on in the round. So that's how, when you need to have food to flush ewes, we don't need to go buy nuts or buy grain or buy something to feed them up. We've got this to at least start them on and give them that extra boost we need if we want extra lambs as well. And we don't, the most thing I like about it, I can't explain enough, is that you don't need much rain to do this. Any autumn rain any drizzle, you don't need your big 30 mil rains and all that sort of stuff. You need 5 mil, 3 mil. It just comes back, and it will slowly just keep coming back as well. And as you do more of this, the pastures starting to change, so you get more coxswains and more bigger leaf plants, and they have bigger roots, and all of a sudden your quality starts to change as well when you're deferring. So you actually start having cattle do pretty all right on it and not lose weight, and you can run your two-tooth through and still do okay. Grow, they can still grow if they're lightly going through it, and then you just back it up with some cows afterwards. So I'm just trying to get that across. It's not just, if you get more at doing this and a few years in behind you, you can actually get good results. The one thing I want to say is that if you want to try it and pick a paddock, pick probably some of your better paddocks, so they have probably slightly better quality feed. They can actually transfer it over a lot easier, and you get better seed strike. Well, you get a better pasture species when it re-strikes with a few more dominant pastures. I have done it with a straight brown, more brown toppies type pastures, and the first few years it's pretty shocking, the results. But keep at it, and then you get pretty much a pasture like this, and that's going to get better and better as well. So,
Hey,
am I missing anything?
Mate, you're on a hell of a roll. I was waiting for an opportunity to jump in there, but that was some pretty so many awesome lessons that you're sharing there, mate. And I've got about 6 questions that have come up for me that didn't get answered at the field day. So I imagine there's plenty of others, but what I think we'll do is we'll resist the urge to keep pestering you, and give Russ and John a crack and come back to that. But thank you for yeah, pulling all that together and just painting such a neat picture of, you're using deferred grazing in a pretty dynamic way. There's definitely no recipe um, to what you're doing there. It's pretty, and there's just so many different things you're achieving with it. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
So yeah, thanks, mate. We'll now move on to Russell Heald. So Russell and Charlotte Heald Farm near Norsewood in central North Island. They run a 330 cow regenerative organic dairy farm, and I'm gonna let Russell introduce anything else that he'd like to chip in there with, and
Cool. Thanks,
there.
Sam.
So
yeah, thanks for inviting us along, Sam, and awesome to get involved with Quorum Sense. This is the first time getting involved and doing some of this stuff. So yeah, we've been on this pathway for sort of coming up 7-8 years now. So we've certainly learned a lot in our time doing the regenerative systems and then the organics, and like this session tonight on deferred grazing is quite a big topic for us. Like we utilize it a lot right throughout our whole season. So yeah, and especially with milking cows, which is something that sort of doesn't get done a lot in most, especially under most conventional systems. So yeah,
it should be. We're gonna. I mean, what I like about. Well, firstly, thank you so much for being keen. Really appreciate you being here, and I just sort of realised that the clash of context that we've got here, from Mark's Class 6, sheep and beef flock, to your high performance dairy farm. So yeah,
yeah. So yeah, one thing we do with our deferred grazing is, and we've been doing it for a few years now, is we do run a multi-diverse species pasture over pretty much most of the farm. About 80% of the farm's in multi-diverse species pastures, so that really helps. But one thing we do is, like, once we get into that spring growth, one thing I always ask myself where my opportunities are every week with my grazing rotation. And one thing I do is I just go around the farm, select certain paddocks, and then work out, and then I'll see what the growth's doing, see what the weather's doing, and then just take it from there. And so we'll go through and select paddocks to take out, and we'll leave them out for sort of up to 40 days. And then we'll work out whether we see what the weather's doing, see whether we can, if our growth rate's still holding up with those paddocks out of the rotation. And then we'll work out whether we can either take those paddocks off for baleage or whether we have to start strip grazing them. So a lot of our deferred paddocks, we do strip graze them like a crop. So we do a lot of high density grazing with it, rather than just a lot of either set grazing or block grazing with it. And that's something that's worked really well for us. So we'll go through and we'll get, say, even out of a 3 hectare paddock, we'll get up to 10 to 12 days out of it, strip grazing it, and then I'll put them onto there, milk them onto that, and then out to another paddock after that. But one thing we've noticed is that by doing that, we've created when you allow those plants to really to grow, like to get out to that 40, 50, 60, even up to 70 days, everything goes to seed. You get all that energy into your seed head, and that's with all your grasses, with all your legumes and forbs as well. And then, so one of the biggest things we've noticed is we've got that seed spread right throughout our farm. So we've got paddocks now that we haven't, like that, because we've got paddocks in our farm that we can't get a tractor over. Not a lot of it, but some paddocks. So quite often we'll utilize the deferred grazing paddocks. We'll strip graze them, and then the cows will go up into those paddocks, and we get a massive seed drop through the cows. And then it's after about 3 or 4 years, you'll go into that paddock and like we can go into those paddocks now, and it's pretty much like we've done a full diverse pasture species mix in that paddock. So that's been a massive benefit by
So
doing.
Russ, are you saying you're carrying multi-species seed from the paddocks you can get a tractor over, and using the cows to effectively carry that and dump it on the paddocks you can't get a tractor on?
Yeah, yeah,
Wicked.
yeah, and that's worked really well for us. And then we've actually over the last 2 years, we've actually been able to turn that around, and then now use some of those paddocks that we can't get the tractor over, like start defer grazing them, and then start block grazing those paddocks as well. And what that's enabled is actually building more of that seed bank up and getting a real good seed drop in those paddocks. Yeah, so it's working really well doing that. But it's just created flexibility, created resilience, reduces that stress around the feed for our cows. Because one thing I noticed, especially in the dairy systems, is a lot of dairy farms, they'll get into that spring, they'll cut their baleage, and then they can get into a point where 2 or 3 weeks later, they're actually putting that baleage back into the system. So by doing this, like on our farm, we're able to take those paddocks out, either defer graze them or put them in for baleage, but we've created options around that. So it's all basically around what the weather's doing and and around our opportunities. So yeah, and then so basically, like we only started feeding out probably 2 weeks ago at home with our cows. And typically, like, we're probably 6 to 8 weeks after most farms in our area before we're feeding out. And that's basically because we're holding those covers, holding a longer rotation, but holding those diverse pastures, but like pushing them out to sort of 60 or 70 days, strip grazing them to hold that rotation out on the rest of the farm, and also just to hold those residuals as well.
And just I'll just flick the photos over here, but this sort of that photo on the right there, Russ, is that sort of what your for 50, 60, 70 days is looking like, or are you?
Yeah, so
That
that paddock's around sort of just on 50 days. So one thing we do is, like, we will increase that stocking density. So sometimes the cows are moved sort of 4 or 5 times a day. So one thing, like with our family too, like, it's created that family time for us. A lot of us, like, we all go out in the evening around sort of 7 o'clock, between 7 and 8 o'clock, and do the shift with the cows right on sunset. And yeah, it's something we've created for our family that we do together. So that's been pretty cool, bringing that into the system as well. And that paddock on the left is typically what they're leaving behind. So we are leaving some pretty high residuals behind. But what we're noticing, that, like, when we're coming back into those paddocks, typically they're sort of around that 40 days, even a bit longer, before we're coming back into those paddocks. A lot of that, any trash that's trampled is broken back down, and the amount of clover growth is probably sometimes up over 80%, especially over that summertime.
We've got a wee video here, if it works, which we can play and you can talk us through that, 'cause I don't think the sound's coming through.
Yeah, so this is just going out and doing a move one evening with the cows. So you can basically see what they're leaving behind. It's a reasonably high residual, but it's very even in terms of what they're grazing. It's not clumpy at all. And we're not leaving that higher, drier stalk, which is pretty important in the dairy system. Like, it's because we find, like, you need to get that carbs and protein balance right. And sometimes those paddocks, we have had it where we have left a little bit too much. And if we come back in too early on some of the other ones, some of those paddocks, if they get a little bit too much of that dry matter coming back in, then yeah, it does affect them production wise. But doing what we're doing this, like at the moment, like, we can hold most of our pastures around sort of 40 odd days, And even some of the deferred grazing paddocks that we let go to 70 days, our cows will go in there, we can hold production. But it's also allowed us to hold a lot of condition on cows. So it's reduced a lot of feed stress. So yeah, you can see in these pictures kind of what they're going into. So it's not typical for a dairy pasture to sort of look like that.
Yeah, and I think maybe final question for me before we jump over to John or us is what happens to your milk production when you jump on through that deferred stuff?
Yeah, so we have no change in our milk production at all by utilizing these deferred grazing paddocks. And I think a big part of it is quite often in the dairy system, we're grazing our pastures too short. So we're not allowing those clovers and those forbs to really come through in our pastures. And then so then we're not getting enough of the protein coming through that we're needing. And I suppose under the diverse pastures, it's allowed us to do that. But over the last few years, like even some of the paddocks that we haven't regrassed, we're able to start utilizing some of those as well. So yeah, you can do it on rye and clover paddocks. And so one thing we've seen is by letting that rotation go out, you just start promoting more of those clovers and the chicory and the plantain to really flourish and really get up and get going.
Awesome. Hey Russell, thanks so much for that. That's just really cool to see. What I'm going to do now is drop the share screen there, and lucky last is Jono Frew. He'll be familiar. Every time I try and mention your name, I'll screw up a word at either side of it. Familiar to many of you, and Jono currently farms at Demet Farms in the Waitaki Valley near Kuro, and so you're really stoked to have Jono here. He's been a big part of Quorum Sense from the get-go, and we've also he also brings with him a few years experience coaching farmers around the country and various kind of things. So it's not just Jono's farm that he's bringing with him, but a whole lot of experience from around the country, which is going to be super valuable. So thanks very much, Jono, for making the time and being with us this evening, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Cool. Yeah, so I'm Jono. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so we're up just underneath Mount Demet in the Waitaki Valley. Our house is just over 300 meters above sea level. We go up to 1,500 meters. So we've got just over 1,000 meters of elevation on the farm, which makes it very unique in the challenge or the opportunity of managing this farm in a regenerative manner. And so we're talking about deferred grazing. Our farm is from up the top. There's not many areas on our farm where you would probably say aren't deferred grazing. I think probably most of our farm, in fact, I would say all of our farm, like our shortest rotations, 70 days. And some of our longer stuff is around that 200-day mark. And some places are more than that, like out here, where we literally lock the block up for 6 months before we graze it. Once we carve down our cows. So I won't focus too much on the back country, but this is what it looks like after 6 months. And you can see there, these are the south faces, a lot greener, a lot more feed. The north face is a bit bonier, a bit more harsh, I guess you could say. One big thing about how we manage this stuff has been actually breed selection and breeding sort of epigenetically breeding traits into our herd. Like, for instance, we have a mob of white Galloway we do for meat for some local butcheries, and what we've noticed with those girls is they will target seed head and some of the fattest cows in the district. I'm just going to lower the volume of this so it doesn't feed back into the microphone, but this here is a very poor quality video of me and Harper shifting the cows in on the 25th of February this year. We've had a very dry year this year. This is down on the lower country, and this is the longest rest I've given any of the areas on the farm of the lower country, what we call Spring Hills. And I'll just play this and speak through. This is what we're leaving behind this year. I'll just pause it there. This year, I'll let it keep going because it plays for about 3 minutes. This year, you can see where the fence was there. Break feeding, as Russell and Mark have both alluded to, is how we best utilize our deferred feed. We're sort of aiming for leaving around 15% of the biomass standing and trying to eat and trample the rest. I'm not after any specific residual when I'm grazing this stuff. I'm really just monitoring animal behavior. I'm trying to keep soils covered, so definitely not getting so low that we're leaving bare soil. This is some of the lucerne seeds that we're able to produce, and you can just imagine all that now. We've just had some rain. It's been a very dry year. I would have had some photos of that, but we've only just had the rain. So I'm expecting all that red clover, all those beautiful seeds to come up in the next couple of days. One thing I will say is we are not scared of seed head. We're not. Our animals and the breeding program that we have, and I guess the management of the animals as well, is they thrive on this stuff. So it's not like I'm out there chasing high ME or high quality. I like I think it was Russell said before, it ain't pretty. I was singing of the In Excess song. This ain't pretty, it's this context we have of what pasture should look like. If you look at those cows, and those cows have still got their calves on them, all those white Galloways still have calves at foot. All the black ones are autumn calvers that are calving as we speak. Absolutely just chonking animals. So yeah, I can't emphasize that enough, as like using animal performance as the tool to understand sort of how far to push the needle as far as deferred grazing goes. I selected this paddock. I was actually going to take it out for hay. I was going to make hay out of it, and our mower broke down, and we had to get a contractor in, and the contractor forgot to mow this paddock. So it was kind of an accident, but at the same time, it was pretty cool just to leave it for another 3 and a bit months, or just on 3 months before we grazed it. And we had this mob of 180 cows with 100 calves, or actually 140 odd calves, in this paddock for nearly 3 weeks, back fencing every sort of 3 or 4 days. We weren't stressing about back fencing because we're not, with the level of dry, we weren't regrowing that quickly, but a couple of weeks and you saw a green tinge come back. I'm also monitoring the stools, so not just color for understanding protein, but also the kind of I refer to when it's too much fiber, we've got skyscrapers, so the poos that are stacked up on top of each other, that would tell me that they're having too much fiber. We need to have a bit more protein, and that poo you just saw, I would say, I was pretty happy with that given the season. I'll just skip through here. This was a paddock that I took for silage in the first week of December. This photo was taken last week, so that shows you that's sort of, what's that, nearly 5 months of recovery, but after a cut of silage. So when we're looking at paddocks to defer, it could be a kind of a retrospective rest of a paddock that's been, like I would say, a cut of silage is hard on a paddock. This year, with the dry that we've had, the recovery has been more like a rest, the distinction being growth and activity. So I went out last week and scratched in some oats just to sort of fill it up a bit with this, with the rain imminent, and we got the rain. So we've also got diverse mix of species. Some are active and some winter active. So now with this rain, I'm expecting to grow a heap of cocksfoot and start to see some of those grasses coming through that, predominantly lucerne and red clover there. And I'd love to see some oats as well. This is down at 350 meters. This is another shift. I wrote the date down for this one. 24th of January, this one. So we were really dry at this time. If we were on a 40 or 50 or 60-day round, we'd be grazing nothing. This is our first year on this farm as well, and I was kind of seeing the dry this year as a bit of a blessing, and thinking to myself, it's only going to get easier going forward. If we weren't, I'll just pause that. Another crucial element of decision making is creating supplement. We graze dairy cows in the winter on pasture and grass, silage, and hay, all made ourselves. So I've got to be responsible for making sure we've got hay and silage, and I do select the paddocks that we cut based on sort of the fullness of the pastures. So, for instance, this year, that paddock that we left for 200 plus days will will be a prime candidate for cutting for silage or hay next year. This is after leaving that paddock last year, same time, was a bit greener into the winter, and then this is July. So there's the cocksfoot starting to go. We graze it once in the winter, and we graze it hard. Like, well, for me, what I say hard is probably 1600 residual. And we graze it evenly, and we don't do a whole lot of trampling. The cows do a really good job of eating everything. And then one grazing in the spring, and most of this country is locked up for either a long rest or silage or hay. And I think we are good for, that's about it for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jono. That's, again, pretty contrast
Sam, I
and
just turned
distinction
my speaker
between.
back on. I just realized I had that off since I was playing the videos.
Sweet. Oh, you wouldn't want to miss the sound of my beautiful voice, would you?
You've been telling me to hurry up or stop talking.
I actually just sent you a message in the chat as you finished saying 2 minutes, so you did well. Talk about a contrast with some of those photos from Russell, in terms of the color of everything and the scope of what you're dealing with there, mate. It's pretty cool. So that's our 3 presentations for this evening. Now, just checking in, aware that it's 7 minutes to 9 o'clock. I'm really keen to push on and make sure we give this a really good this question and discussion a really good crack. So if that takes us to 9:20, 9:30, very happy to do so. If anyone needs to pop off, you're more than welcome to. But would love to get stuck into this. So that I can see a few people are finding the Q&A box. So just remind those of you that aren't familiar with that, down at the bottom of your screen there, punch some questions in, and we'll do our best to get through them. Now, I think the first question that came from Cornelia was when Mark was presenting. So I'll throw this one at you, Mark. How long do the positive effects last of deferred grazing, and when would you defer the same paddock again?
Yeah, good question. I guess the positive effects last for a while. I don't know, a few years. It'll probably last for a lot longer than that. A lot of that seed stuff is, a lot of it's to do with your management afterwards, I would say, actually. A lot of that, if you defer graze and then decided to go into that paddock when it wasn't recovered, you'll bugger it up. If it went right for a couple of years and then you decided to set stock it for a whole season, or mismanage it a bit like that, you can easily revert it back to a negative pasture. Well, I guess to more like a fine leaf brown top type of pasture in my context on hill country. Same as if you're with a dairy farm, you just start degenerating it as well. So the key is you got to keep up with the management and that rest time or that recovery time after you've deferred grazed as well. A lot of my paddocks I defer graze annually, but just because it's easy to get the ewes here in the winter. I can get tractors there if it snows, that sort of practical side of it. On the flats where we can access every paddock, a lot of those, I specifically pick paddocks that I want to like either defer because I know it's a sandy soil or something that I can try and test out how far I can pull this, or if I want to just see the one with like pastures running a bit out, I'll want to jumpstart it at a low cost system, so I just defer it and come in with quite high densities. That sort of selection starting to disappear now since I've got such long rounds in my rotation. We're actually getting seed strikes anyway, so that pasture running out's not happening as often, or it doesn't really happen. It's just still part of the old farm system. So yeah, and those first two photos, that hasn't been deferred for 3 years now. So you're starting to, and it's still all there and all looks great, and it's mostly my density that's causing the how much we grow on it, and that. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. That's hopefully that answers your question there, Cornelia. I might just jump in with one that was burning for me, which was, the difference in kind of what you're starting with when you're looking at deferred grazing. Some of us will have, native hill country that might be brown top dominant, for example. Others might be ryegrass white clover dominant. Russell, you got mostly sort of newish deferred, high fertility deferred diverse pastures there. Mark, a lot of your flats are now pretty much sown into a diverse mix, and Jono, you've got a bit of everything, although I guess most of your farm's still what you'd call native up the back there. So is there anything that comes to mind, and I'll throw this to any of you, in terms of, if you're looking at the pasture species that are in those paddocks, and let's say sort of a lower fertility, medium, and there's sort of those diverse mixes with those big grasses and big clovers, how do you treat those differently in terms of how you shut them up, how you manage them, how you graze them? And yeah, whoever wants to jump in on that one, go for it.
Right, I'll go. So if just one this is one context in my opinion, but if I was going to go and hit a paddock I've never deferred before, and it's got, I don't know, quite dominant brown top, probably also possibly quite a high thatch content to it, I wouldn't go and think to myself, I'm going to defer this so I can get good quality pasture out of it. I'm not going to defer it to get good growth rates out of the cattle out of it. But what we'll do is to try and bring it back to life. So I would just defer it so I would have enough feed there to get enough density, and I'm talking probably over 100,000, probably 200,000 density, to try and stimulate some sort of jump start or biology to really give it, and I'll really go on there pretty hard. And that would be a context out of that. So we wouldn't be looking at performance then, you'd just be looking at that one off. Let's just hit it hard and let's see what happens. Yeah, so that's one context. If it's a good pasture, I don't even look at density. I'm just like, oh, well, it will come back anyway, I'll be fine. That's how I look at it as well.
Sometimes,
You're right, so you'll...
sorry, Sam, go ahead.
I was going to say, so basically the higher quality the feed and the deferred, the less you feel the need to put density into it to achieve the result you're looking for. Is that what I heard there?
Yeah. We still have reasonable density, but it's not at front of mind, not a priority.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, no, I like what you're saying there. Just growing something to smash, basically, Mark, to wake the soil environment up, not necessarily focusing on the deferring to kind of have plant expression. But what I often look at with paddocks that perhaps aren't poor performers, but maybe are a bit thin, or paddocks in really challenging environments, not so much. I really rate Mark's approach to those brown top areas. But one thing that's often overlooked is the generation of new seeds of plants that are adapting to your environment. So actually letting them express it and letting them reproduce. It's like you couldn't pick a better seed for your environment than one that's grown and adapted and produced offspring or the next generation more suited to that environment. So just something else that's often overlooked is like it's not just any old seed you're producing. Every year you're producing a better plant for your environment.
Thanks, Russ. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, something we look at like is when we especially after our summer mix species crops that we utilize over the summer, and then they'll get sown, like the grasses get sown into them in the autumn. But we find that, well, I find the following, I tend to defer those paddocks the following summer, because it really allows some of those younger plants, it really allows them to get those roots down and really just build those sugars up, and really, like John was saying, like those plants really get to express themselves and go to their full maturity before you coming in and grazing them. Because especially in the dairy industry, one thing I find is like we tend to overgraze. So if we're not allowing those plants to really express themselves and really get out to that full maturity and build those seed heads, then yeah, I think it's a bit of a lost opportunity. So so that's something that we look at doing in our system. And one interesting point that I picked up on Jono's one was like how the cows, like how his animals go through and they'll select seed heads, and that's something that I've really noticed with our cows. Like we'll shift our cows and they'll go through and they'll select like seed heads, or the flowers. They'll go through and they'll actually top graze down. Like they won't always just go down into the bottom, down into that really lush clover and chicory and plantain like we think they would. So like one of the biggest things we do is like when we move our cows, we actually stay with them for 5 or 10 minutes and actually walk through them and observe how they graze and what they're grazing. And like even certain times of year, they will go through and they'll be picking out dock and other plants that we deem weeds. So it's amazing when you actually take that time and observe in those deferred grazing paddocks how those cows are grazing them.
Do you find, Russell, because what you said before really brought me back to my dairying days of my younger years, chasing the 25, 28-day round. Thought that was like the bomb, and wondering why my paddocks were going to seed so quick. Like one thing that is a good thing to understand is when you're going into what we're calling a deferred grazing practice, is like, what's your management been like thus far? What's your understanding of the root structures based on your management? If you've been, nailing your pastures or having really short rotations and plants haven't been able to express their roots down, then, plants just by nature of stress will go to seed a lot sooner. So, longer recoveries, incrementally increasing those recoveries or dramatically just giving a paddock a huge rest, will allow you to grow more vegetative growth for longer, following
Yeah,
that.
you've definitely seen that. Like even some of our ryegrasses that we do put back in, like we don't tend to grow they're not ryegrass based dominant pastures anymore. But even some of them, they're getting up to 5 or 6 leaves before they're putting the seed head up. So those plants aren't under stress. And I think that's a really big one, and especially in the dairy system, is that when you do overgraze, you do stress those plants. And then you're shortening that root zone, so you're shortening the amount of available nutrients, the amount of available water. So it's something that we have observed.
With that, just adding to that, with a decent rest going into winter, and then one winter grazing of our, what I would call our low, sort of more productive country, which we graze dairy cows on, in the spring, before the heat of the summer, right into the heat of summer, we're getting cocksfoots 5.5 leaves before they're producing even at the boot stage. So it just gives you an example of just how far you can push tillering without stressing the plant to reproduction. If you think, retrospectively of what's the roots doing before you lock that paddock up.
Right. I just want to come back, Mark. A couple of times you mentioned stock densities and 1 to 200, and I shared because the question here from Greg around live weight per hectare. So when you're saying 1 to 200, you mean 1 to 200,000 kilos of live weight per hectare? When you're talking,
Oh, when I was talking about 100,000 kgs live weight per hectare, so someone can work out how many animals that is. Usually I don't have like 300 cows in 1 hectare. I usually go 100 cows or something and 0.4 hectares or something like, it'll be broken down, so it just works out to be about that. On the hill country, I definitely don't get to that sort of number. It's more like 10,000 or 5,000, but it's better than 200 and that. So yeah.
Yeah, so that comes nicely to Greg's question, which is, are you aware of the live weight per hectare that you're stocking at, which you've just answered, and do you have targets for stock density, I guess, to achieve? So let's throw that to all of you. You kind of answered that, Mark, but if you want to chip in any more there, go for it.
Yeah, the standard one, that's not deferred grazing either, but I always try and aim for anything over 40 to 50,000, and the 100,000 is when I start using it as a tool. So I can usually get pretty good density at 50,000 all year round on the flats, and obviously on the hill country I can't do that. So the hill country is looking at between 5 and 10,000 kgs per hectare, which if we were grazing in larger, like not rotationally grazing that, so to speak, you'd only be getting 100 kilos per hectare. So you can see the extreme differences in what we're achieving. So
And so what are your at that sort of, just to help me get my head around that, like the 5 to 10,000, how many days you're in a paddock for at that roughly on that hill country?
Yeah, it's hard to work out. Usually about a week, 5 to 7 days. Depending on the block, sometimes 10 days. It's and I have the block split up. But yeah, I try and do that. It's better than 2 months, or if that's how much you get out of it. So yeah, I try and it's more like 5 to 7 days as a weekly shift up there, because it's quite a big effort to do that. And then some big blocks I just do it for a month with a whole heap of stock, and then we'll just have but that paddock's been rested for like Johnny was saying, five months or something. So it's pretty long rest, and then 1 month of grazing is bugger all for it, really, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jono, do you work in live weight per hectare and targets and anything like that?
Yeah, definitely have done over the years, and like that's what I've coached as well. Now my eyes I have, I don't know if you boys can relate to this, but you can just see, that's without even looking at your residual. I just have like a kind of an image in my mind of how many animals in an area, which give me, what results I want this year. And funny enough, there's a question on it by an anonymous attendee at 9:03 p.m. talking about the Graham hand high utilization kind of method. That's been me all year this year on the lower country. And I'm really excited to see what this rain does to things. So yeah, with the longer, with deferring paddocks, I'm not scared of really grazing, high utilization, because I know that it's not just leaf derived energy that I'm relying on. It's that root stored energy, and when there's moisture, it's like an instant recovery from whatever you leave behind. I just make sure I don't leave open bare soil. So most of what I'm leaving will be trampled, not necessarily a residual as such, although some of those plants in that trampled litter will be still photosynthesizing and will actually stand up again. It's just this illusion of being smashed.
One
Jono,
thing like that, basically, like with the cows, one thing I've worked out is basically the higher our covers in our deferred grazing paddocks, or even in our rotation length, the higher the covers, the higher the density. So and that gets back to that last question, like that high utilization, and like I suppose because with cows, like, and with having those diverse pastures, we do get really high utilization. Like, but what I work on is like what's left behind is trampled. So it's still leaving a good high residual on the plants that are grazed, but then what plants aren't grazed are actually trampled, and are then basically getting broken back down. So that's one thing we look at in our system.
Have I got time for a quick story? Very quick.
You go for it.
It involves over 1 million kgs of live weight density per hectare. There's a man I know named Pete. I probably don't need to say any more about said man. He told me a story when he was farming in sort of near the Catlins, of a night he was expecting 2 inches of rain, and he put his wee mobs in again, like well, not again, but just, you can achieve high density with small mobs. It's just very small cells. He did 17 shifts overnight at over 1 million kgs of live weight density with 2 inches of rain, and he drove his 2-wheel drive Primera across all of that land he had grazed in the morning. So that's a pretty cool story. And like again, density, I don't want, like, sort of part of the reason why I didn't use numbers is I don't want it to deter people or have it be like some sort of target. You've got to do what works for you. And like for me, I've got a young baby at home, like I don't want to go shifting my cow 17 times overnight. I have a life. But yeah, I have had playing, I've played around with 500 kgs, 500,000 kgs of live weight per hectare this year. It's hard to work out I don't add the calves into that figure. But I've still got all springborn calves on all mums still now. I probably will till, we'll see. I might not win at all, but yeah, it's just a difficult thing to work out. Again, I just go back to my eyes.
Brings up just around what it takes to achieve the result. One of my mentors, Dean Martin, who's on our Diverse Pastures webinar in a couple of weeks. One of the first times I visited his place, he had these paddocks that were completely flattened, and he had calves and lambs in there. And I was like, I just assumed he'd put the cows through first, and for some reason it left them behind, and I couldn't quite work out the logic of that. And that turned out that the calves and the lambs had done it, but effectively, kind of coming back to your story, Mark, about how your pastures had like thickened and changed over time as he had built up that soil density and the evolution of his pastures, they just got easier and easier to manage, to the point that he could actually achieve those results with really young stock classes. Whereas at the start, he was reliant on his tool of choices, basically dairy heifers that he'd move, twice a day kind of thing, to achieve 2 to 4 times a day. But after a while, he's putting in lambs and calves for 3 or 4 day breaks and achieving, really good results and still good growth rates on stuff that was kind of knee high. So there's I found that like really encouraging, but he did have to earn the right to get, to be able to do that. So,
For me, it's not so much a point of like whether the animals can handle it. I like it, and that's what's so cool leaving cows on mums. Like they learn a lot off their mothers, behaviorally, of what to graze and why. But it's more those small hooves that get me in trouble. It's those little hooves and more live weight or pounds per square inch of on smaller areas to press on the ground. But just, can I speak to this one about different approaches just very briefly? Summer versus winter stockpile. One thing I will mention there is for winter stockpile, I will treat them as like like 95% utilization. Like I'm pretty much going right down to the point where there's just a green tinge, where the color changes and you lose the color and it goes sort of a white pale color in the plant. Like that for me is too far. I always want to have green, but in the winter I treat it as like a really good time to have like a reset, not to thin your pastures, but just to sort of like Siobhan Griffin talks about, a good reset in the winter can grow you up to 50% more feed through the summer just by sort of like hitting the reset button, but doing it when the plants aren't, in full activity like in the summer.
Yeah, thanks, John. Any Mark or Russell, any thoughts on summer versus winter stockpile and treating and managing those differently?
Yeah, we tend to like definitely over the summer, like we're leaving our higher residuals over that summertime. Just especially while those plants are still actively growing, like, and like John alluded to before, like about that solar panel, like always thinking of what you're leaving behind, and so think of that solar panel, what's left, and then yeah, over that winter time, like we definitely do take it down a lot lower over that winter time, and it is like a reset, like he was saying, like John was saying before, like it's just when those plants aren't in a high growth sort of, yeah, they're not in that high growth zone, so they're yeah, doesn't hurt them to be taken down over that winter time to give them a good reset.
Yeah, I'm the exact same, pretty much. Every green leaf is fair game in the winter. Usually with the long rotations, you've got the ability to do that. So yeah, and that deferred grazing that we try and guarantee our winter feed for our ewes to get that quality feed, that gets chewed down pretty damn low with the ewes. But then we've also got to make sure they don't get supplements, so they've got to be moved on pretty quick. So don't it gets grades low, probably about to 1200, 1300 with single bearing ewes in there. But yeah, it's every blade of grass is fair game.
One other thing I'd quite like to add that's quite important in our system is offering minerals, especially salt. So at different times of the year, we do different. We get people like Mainland Minerals do up custom mixes. We don't use palm kernel, so we supplement it with, or substitute it, I should say, with humates, and we also do pink Himalayan rocks, and we've also been using Vitus. That's Ewan Campbell's one of his brews as like a salt lick, and what we've found is with the minerals on offer, and especially the salt, I just can't rate salt enough. I really think it helps them convert that feed that may be higher in fiber or carbon than most people would consider good quality. I don't know. Yeah, we have really happy cows, and I can't rate salt enough in these dry environments with longer rest periods.
Nice, Johnny. You keep I think there must be something going on, because there's 3 times I've been out about to ask a question, and you've just jumped in straight in there on the same wavelength. So because the question was, we've talked a bit about plants and plants changing, but about what are the things that we need to be aware of, or that we can manage in terms of animal performance and animal health when we're potentially putting a bit more pressure on stock. So we've talked a bit about like the higher performance ones, but we've also had some of the the lower quality, the lower quality feed situations, particularly like I assume, Mark, in your earlier days, most of the stuff you're deferring lower quality than it is now. So, is there, how much of a role does sort of breeding, selection, epigenetics in our livestock play a part versus some of the things that Jono's talking about there in terms of supplementation and managing other things? What should we be looking out for? I mentioned it. I put your name in there, Mark, so you might as well have a crack at that first.
I'll really crack at that. I do believe about epigenetics, especially with pastures, and actually with our beef cows. We've been playing around with that for the last 4 or 5 years, actually. You'll call it line breeding when it works, and inbreeding if it doesn't. So done a little bit of that back crossing in that with the cattle, but we also select all our stock are selected for a type, short stocky wheelbarrows pretty much. So all our sheep are like that as well. With fine wool sheep, we're 75% merinos, so quarter breed ewes. They're all selected from that type of sheep. So they're hill country sheep. They have to walk up and down to the bit of that, and they, for the last probably 3 or 4 years, definitely the cows have adapted to shifting and searching and changing their habitat in terms of what they eat and that. I've noticed that that's all kind of changed, and they're much more settled, to be honest. Especially when we've weaned calves, it's like they've never been off mum. After a couple of days, you just walk them around and they're just rotating around with the rest of the stock. It's quite cool. But yeah, I think the behavior of stock changes once you get doing it, and they start to figure out what's good and not. But yeah, if you're starting out with, just starting out, minerals does play a big part. I'm starting to realize a little bit that more and more now that, we've been playing around with minerals for the last 2 or 3 years, trying to get that balance right. So yeah, that does have a part, but I think it gets better as the plants get deeper roots and bring up more of that minerals themselves as well. So yeah, that's my take on it.
I see
Russ,
Phil's got a question here of how to deal with lignified material in the hill country where you can't get density. You're not going to get every stalk down to the ground. But I've actually found this year, like, that's been a real godsend, especially up high, like you talked about, Mark, with catching all that mist and fog. Like, it's you ride the bike through there, you're wet through, like, it's that's capturing water. So, like, it's not, I mentioned before, like, sort of work on, happy to leave sort of 15% behind on the bottom country. The top country, that might look more like 50% of plants with some stalk standing, and like, that's okay. Like, eventually you'll get another plant grow close enough to it that it becomes part of the next bite. And, like, if you lose a little bit to oxidization, or I wouldn't stress too much about it. I noticed this year that even like out the back, cows were eating kellies, like the stalks of kellies, and I don't know, there's something in it, but yeah, it's I think a really big part of sort of how to manage these higher lignin material plants is definitely in behavior and breeding. I think those two. I think you can change behavior without changing breed through management.
That's actually a good way to put it, Jono. That's yeah. You're on it. You're onto it.
And
now.
I can't get out of my head the image of Mark pushing his sheep around like a wheelbarrow. I just is there a test for that? Oh yeah, good wheelbarrow.
Yeah. Narrow shoulders, big back end. That's easy lambing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
cool. Hey, so just everyone that's still with us, conscious it's 9:22, so for some of you that'll be past bedtime for those early risers. So we'll wrap it up, but I just want to give Jono, Mark, and Russell sort of just one last chance to, I guess, we've got a pretty diverse bunch of people on with us this evening based on the names that I could recognise. There's a few pretty experienced farmers that I know have quite a lot of experience with this. Got a few scientists on, which is awesome, and a couple of people as well who I know are sort of new to the deferred grazing, longer recovery, sort of curious, but without so much experience as the three of you. So, is there anything else that we haven't covered this evening that you'd like to chip in with? As just some key tips, tricks, ideas, next steps. Just take a minute each if you want, just to wrap us up there.
I think within the dairy industry, like, there's a real big fear around like having deferred grazing paddocks, because we're always wanting that short lush feed, and I quite often get asked this is like, how do they perform like when you're feeding them that really high cover, and it's almost like you're feeding them a hay. Most of our paddocks are like hay paddocks, but yeah, like the cows have adapted really well, and like I think one of the biggest things we lack in the dairy industry is actually fiber. Like, we overload our animals with like protein. We feel like we need to be putting more and more protein into them, and we're just stressing their system out. But and that's one thing I've observed by doing the deferred grazing is like having that extra fiber in there is actually being beneficial, not detrimental. So like, a big thing is to give it a go too. Like, don't be scared of giving it a go.
Awesome. Thanks, Russell. Jono?
Yeah, so with you there on that one, Russell. There's more to life than ME, and I'm not discrediting ME, but or protein, but there's this huge focus on protein all the time. I mean, proteins are vital; they're the building blocks of life. but there's other things that are important as well. And one thing that I've noticed is like, this is just an assumption, but the different times of the year we always have minerals out. But when the cows are in the paddocks that have the longest rests, that's when they go off the minerals. They might still eat the salt block, but they don't touch the minerals. So my observation is that there's more mineral density, not just from plant expression above ground and maturity, but also you're accessing different pools of nutrients and minerals in the soil. Yeah, I think that the longer the rest and the more diversity of plants, that's another really important thing. Final thing, plant diversity. If you've just got ryegrass and you defer it, it's probably going to be like, I would be watching closely. Like, if you've got one plant and it goes to seed, there's nothing ready to take up the growth underneath with green vegetative growth. I think it's really important to understand the role that diversity plays in deferred grazing, as in, like, there's always something that's growing in green most of the time.
Thanks, Johnny. You just open up another hour's worth of conversation there, which we'll have to say for another time. Mark.
I was just going to jump in there, John, and say that's exactly what I did, and that, probably 3 years later we've got a diverse pasture, so it can be done. Just takes, you can't expect it overnight. My key takeaway, well, what I want to tell people, I guess, but is that you can do this sort of practice on quite a vast amount of properties. And if you want to go have a crack at it and see what actually happens, try and see if you can do it on a paddock that you can actually almost fully control a little bit, get your idea about it, how it would work, how it would respond under your management. But like you said, we can do it on any sort of country in vast areas and can create feed in like dry conditions now. So that'll be my takeaway. And you don't have to have the money. Don't have millions of dollars behind me to do it. So that's why I like it. It's the low cost utilization of feed, and to grow. Like, when the drought broke, you hear of people putting Deferred on, before it even rained, and you think to yourself, wow, we don't have to do that, and we get a bit of moisture, and that just grows food anyway. So so you don't have to spend money to get there. So that'd be my takeaway.
And make your temporary fences your friends.
Yeah. It's pretty good. We've put them up semi-permanent now, so we don't actually have to do it all the time. So that works out pretty good.
Nice. Thanks, guys. I think the other context to I guess fill in a bit of gaps between the three of you is probably ours is probably quite a good one. We're predominantly a dairy heifer system with R1 and R2s on sort of a ryegrass white clover base with a bit of cocksfoot coming through, and then there's your brown tops and hogtails and rat's tails and whatever, and bits of red clover that pop up here and there. And I've been probably cautious as someone who has like performance targets for clients to hit, that are quite explicit in the risks around that, and the fact that they tend to be weighed every sort of 6 weeks, and 6 weeks on a deferred grazing paddock's quite a long time to I'm using my eyes a lot to go I hope checking gut scores and dung scores and stuff to make sure they look like they're growing and they're settled and things like that. But there's a couple of key things that we did to kind of have confidence in that. Like, I went and spent a bit of money and put some urea blocks in there, the urea protein blocks and stuff like that, particularly on the lower quality stuff that was quite brown top dominant in that. And whether or not that was a good investment, I was just trying to kind of cover some risk there, because the cost of them not performing over that period was there. But on the flip side of that, those paddocks that we deferred, and maybe the R2s took a little pinch there, but they're doing fine. That is by far our best quality calf feed at the moment. And like you were talking about, Mark, like little 5.3, 5.7 mil drizzles and rains has grown a huge amount of feed, and the rest of the farm's barely moved in that. So it's been pretty amazing, like using the older stock to kind of set up for the younger stock at this time of year. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because it was some of the stuff you guys are talking about I struggled to relate to in our context just because of that performance aspect and sort of being pretty limited in the terms of the number of stock classes we've got. But Mark, you've got something burning before I wrap up, so go for it, mate.
Yeah. Sorry. A good starting point if you want to, well, if you're in sheep beef context anyway, for how much you want to defer in a like a farm scale sort of thing. I do a minimum 25% deferred grazing across the whole farm. This year we actually, because we saw it wasn't going to rain, we guessed it wasn't going to rain. We did 50%, and that's how we've got through. Well, we've got through pretty high stock numbers actually. We haven't actually destocked, so that's just a rough idea of what we work on. So yeah, put it out there for you guys to start somewhere there.
Nice.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that's funny
Mark.
you say that, Mark. In a drought, yeah, we've kept all our heifers, even our empties. So yeah, funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, like Sam alluded to when he came up our farm, he could spot our boundary a mile away.
Yeah, driving along the road going, where's Mark's boundary? It's going to be the green one. And it wasn't let down there. Well, we did have to destock. Yeah, well, yeah, our planned destocking levers, we pulled them about a month ago to do that, just to try and protect those autumn recoveries, because I hate going into autumn with low covers because it makes for a hell of a spring in a negative way. But anyway, just want to wrap up. One thing I want to, I guess, acknowledge to everyone here who, especially anyone that's sort of newer to deferred grazing, is actually we've blurred the boundaries a lot between longer rotations and grazing rotations in general and deferred grazing. That wasn't intentional, kind of a weird, but it is a really blurry boundary, and but the principles are pretty similar and consistent across it. So just want to kind of note that in case there's anyone that's sitting there confused. It's like, well, yeah, deferred grazing is just a term or a label. It's not particularly in, but the principles that these guys have been talking about this evening around rest and recovery and plant expression and how we manage animals on different kinds of feed, I think applies to pretty generally. So I hope that's come through, and I actually really enjoyed how it's basically impossible to box in what we've talked about this evening. So that's cool. Mainly just want to thank Jono, Russell and Mark for just the generosity of your time, both preparing those sessions and making time. Russell's actually on holiday at the moment, so you get a real gold star. You're probably supposed to be at the pub with a stout in your hand, but you're here with us this evening, which we really appreciate. And to everyone that's joined us this evening and put in questions and just been here with us, thanks for coming along. I hope you got something out of it. Really welcome your feedback. See what would you like to do different, that you might have for these three or myself or anyone. Please feel free to email them through sam@quorumsense.org.nz. Reminder, we've got our Deferred Pastures webinar in a few weeks. You can find that on the Quorum Sense website, or it's also in the link in your chat there. And also just point you to, if you're interested in some research in the data, we haven't really got that, but Catherine Tozer and Karen Miller, who from Ag Research and Planted Food respectively, they're actually here with us this evening. They've been doing some amazing work on deferred grazing up in the North Island over the last few years, and they've got a bit more stuff ongoing, and they've got a bit of that data around how much extra pasture growth they're seeing in autumn and winter following deferred grazing events, things like reseeding, what's happening in the root zone, and things like that. And they've actually pulled together a bit of a handbook on that as well. I think our discussions this evening were potentially a bit broader than what's in there, but if you're interested in that, it was also in the link in the chat that I put in at the start there. So, or if you just Google deferred grazing search, you'll find what I'm talking about. Other than that, oh, someone raised their hand and they dropped it. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great sleep and rest and recovery, and hopefully we'll see some of you on the next couple of webinars. Cheers.